How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another video. And today I want to answer the question that many potential new players might have in the future, assuming we ever get any. What's more important, powers or stats? Now, the answer to this question is very easy. However, it depends on the player, because there are some situations where maybe you will prefer stats over a specific power that you have. Me personally, that usually has never been the case. The only time I will ever go for stats is if that specific power I need happens to have the bonus that it has good stats. Most of the time, I go for powers. Prime example, my musketeer here, Esteban. He's still rocking Santadrena's hat, and the reason why you want to rock Santadrena's hat is so you can potentially get yourself the opportunity to rock Overwatch 5. The beautiful thing about Overwatch 5, which I would recommend checking out my latest Pirate101 guide, the Powers and Epics Basics, is that it's a great crowd control type of epic. In other words, anytime an enemy gets into range, this activates and it will knock back an enemy one square space, which is amazing for crowd control. What this will allow you to do is it will allow you plenty of time to set up your, boost, so you can do a lot more damage, and or it buys you time to add some extra protections for yourself or your companions. It's an amazing thing to have. I think this is one of the reasons as to why Musketeer is one of the easiest class to solo, and why this class is able to do a majority of the content, if not arguably all the content in the game. It's thanks to powers, or in this case epics like this. Now, this is a situation where, yeah, I definitely wanted to go for an epic, same thing as power basically, over just getting specific stats. I could have easily rocked this hat, for example, because it will give me the best of both worlds of extra agility, but also will allow me to use True Grit 3, which will potentially allow me to stun enemies that use range hits. But I was like, nah, this is just much better for my situation. And then there are other cases where, maybe you do want the extra stats. My musketeer is also a good example where I will probably prefer going for a specific stat than a specific power or epic. At the time, for the longest time, I was rocking the Darkmoor Death Spitter so I can obtain myself Overwatch 5. However, thanks to the Tartarus update, we have these boots here, the Artemis Underworld boots, which gives you a rank of Overwatch, which means, in short, that you can actually sacrifice one of the things, rather if it's your weapon, or maybe even the Santadrena hat for something else. In this case, I decided to switch my Darkmoor Death Spitter to the Weapons of the Waster, which you can obtain from Sinbad Part 3. Now, what's great about this weapon in particular? It's the range. It's the fact that it has one of the best range out there for a hybrid setup for a musketeer, and it's really huge. It's a huge deal that there's a weapon that gives a pretty good amount of range for you that is, I wouldn't say free to play because you still have to technically pay to get to this point, but a non-pack paying method in order to obtain a really nice weapon. The biggest benefit to rocking this weapon is most definitely the extra range, which is why I decided to switch from this to this and then rock this to still obtain my Overwatch 5. My Buccaneer is actually another example of a character that goes for powers over stats. The hat that I'm rocking is actually a level 50 hat, which gives Valor's Fortress. The great thing about Valor's Fortress is that it works very similarly to Brace and Wizard 101. In other words, it's a kind of aura, even though it's not really an aura. However, it's a protection shield that is for a couple rounds. Specifically, it protects against all kinds of attacks, including magical attacks. The bad thing about Buccaneer is that you have cards like this, but it's only for physical damage. This one is for all types of damage, including magical damage. If I were to switch anything, it will probably have been the robe. And the thing I was thinking of switching for the robe is actually the Ares Underworld Garb. Now, what's great about the Underworld Garb, you might ask? Well, it's the fact that it can actually allow you to access Turn the Tide within the same turn. It's a very risky move because you do a lot of damage to yourself. However, what it gives you is extra physical resistance along with the weapon power. The biggest thing that you get from it is the weapon power. If you were to say be a fortunate person who happened to get yourself Turn the Tide 5, which I believe the only way to get it is really through a pet, and that's pretty much it, and also Bladestorm 5, then you basically are looking at a very scary situation where you're going to have a very fast Buccaneer that could essentially soul a lot of the content because they do so much damage. And with their chaining ability, it's a very scary situation to be in if you're going against this type of character. Albeit, it's still a very risky move, but it's a playstyle that I think a lot of Buccaneers are willing to make for the sake of an insane power boost. Those are just some situations where, yeah, you definitely will prefer a power over stats. Now, there are some times where you may prefer stats over your powers, and I would say the only legitimate time will probably be a lot of your weapons. I would say weapon-wise, especially in early game, you will probably prefer more weapon power than anything else. But there are some situations where you can technically get around the same weapon power, if not more, if you happen to rock a hybrid. Now, for a newer player, I never recommend anyone as a newer player to rock a hybrid set, mainly because it gets really complicated and also it takes a lot of investment. Start with your pure builds, and once you feel pretty comfortable, then you could probably venture in to the hybrid builds. But typically, you go for weapon power in your weapons a lot of the time. And if you're a player who doesn't happen to have access to specific gear, then generally, yes, you will mainly be using Bazaar gear. That's what I did on my Musketeer when I first started. And you will be going for specific stats. If you want my recommendation, this is what I normally would recommend. If you're a Buccaneer, for example, you'll probably want to go for like your attribute. So your main attribute is typically strength here. So prioritize strength. I would say maybe prioritize accuracy. Definitely prioritize weapon power. I would say the top two in my opinion would be strength and weapon power. Everything else is really up to you. I wouldn't really invest in dodge just because Buccaneer usually wants to get hit. I wouldn't invest in armor just because it really is kind of like it really doesn't really do all that much for you in the long run. You're better off kind of going with a glass cannon-ish kind of build. You could definitely go for health if you want to though. More health is always good, but highest priority will probably be your strength and weapon power. If you were a Musketeer, for example, I would recommend your attribute, agility, along with weapon power, and I will also recommend accuracy. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, I don't think there's any gear that gives you spell power, at least not in the Bazaar. So like, you're kind of out of luck for that one, but the main thing you should be working on is your attribute, weapon power, and accuracy. Maybe health if you really want to. If you're a swashbuckler, then it will be around the same thing. It will probably be your attribute, weapon power, dodge this time. Maybe if you really want to, some accuracy, but I would say higher priority will be dodge. And maybe more health if you want to, but your biggest priority will be your attribute and weapon power. And then dodge would definitely be right there as well, of stuff that you should be going for. If you're going with a privateer, then I would say it will be will, your weapon power maybe some health, maybe accuracy, maybe dodge. It really just depends on what you want. I don't really think that most privateers tend to play where they're going to be the main ones trying to, you know, get some defeats on enemies. You would typically be relying more on your companions. So most important, I will say, will be will. Weapon power if you really want to, especially if we want to do some more damage, considering that the privateer can't really do that much damage. But I would say really, like, it's pretty much up to you. It's up to your playstyle. That's the beauty about privateer, is that it has a bunch of different types of playstyles that people can do, and it's really just up to you. You can get more dodge if you really want to. You can get more accuracy if you really want to. You could definitely get more health if you really want to. But the most important, I would say, unironically for privateer, will be will. And maybe your spell power, but unfortunately in the Bazaar, there's really not anything available that will increase your spell power. As for a Witch Doctor though, I would definitely recommend will, weapon power, accuracy because you have terrible accuracy most of the time, and health if you really want to. Also in the Pirate 101 guide, which I definitely recommend anyone who hasn't watched it to watch it, you can actually get this starter gear from the 3 bosses. I like to call them the Blood Shoals bosses. You basically get to do them when you first start Pirate 101. You get them pretty early level as well. And these are great because they give you a really nice card that you can use throughout your journey. But the most important thing is if you happen to get lucky, you can actually get some mastery cards. These mastery cards basically allow you to do, you know, more of the buffs of that specific. I wouldn't say these are attributes, but we can just call them attributes for the sake of it being easy to explain. But in this case, Mojo Mastery, it will basically increase your spell power by a considerable amount, and yes, these do scale. You have one for weapon power, and then you have one for critical boost. I would say, in my opinion, the most useless one would probably be the critical boost. The main ones you really want to go for is something that either gives you weapon mastery or something that gives you Mojo Mastery. These are the biggest ones. Weapon mastery, I would say ideally, you would give that to a Buccaneer. And Mojo Mastery, I would probably recommend that to every other class. I just don't really see the use for the crit one, mainly because it's mostly just an RNG stat at the end of the day, rather than it giving you more damage. So for a swashbuckler, you can go with either or. You can either go for more damage because swashbucklers tend to get more damage outright, or you can just go for the Mojo Mastery because maybe you want to use poisons more in your kit. Maybe you want to utilize heals more in your kit. It's really up to you. But the Mojo Mastery, I would definitely recommend for like a privateer, a musketeer, and a witch doctor for sure. Swashbuckler can be either or depending on your kit. Most people, I believe, tend to go for weapon mastery, but it's really up to you. And Buccaneers definitely utilize the weapon mastery. Again, for more information, definitely check out the guide. It gives you information as to how to get every single one of these. But these are just really nice to have. And for a lot of my characters, I was able to rock them until, honestly, like, endgame. And even then, for sometimes, I was able to still kind of use them in endgame until I found something kind of better. And I think for a lot of my characters, it took until Sinbad Part 2 to get something that I would think is better, that gave me a card, but also as a bonus gave me better stats. So all I'm trying to say here is a lot of people had different opinions about how to go about their Pirate 101 journey and what's the best. My opinion is that I always will recommend you going for specific powers for your specific builds over going for stats. However, if you want to make things a little bit easier for you throughout your playthrough, especially if it's your first time, just prioritize getting your Bazaar gear. You know, look at your class, see what your class tends to excel in, try to build up on those strengths. And honestly, for pretty much every class, you can just go for Fu Manchu. You know, farm that gear. It's going to be universally pretty decent for every class. So it's really not that big of a deal. And then later on, you could probably consider a little bit more as to what your playstyle is going to be and how you would like to improve your pirate. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Let's have some discussion in the comments down below. And as always, to everyone watching, remember to stay frenzy and peace.